SIG, which is under the umbrella of ISEP. We couldn't be more delighted to have the opportunity to have a 40th celebration of the 1980s publications by Len Allman, David Bunker, and Rod Thorpe. We've had a whole series of webinars as a way to keep our community going during this middle pandemic era that we're in right now. I'm not sure they've really closed the loop on that, but it's been so long since we've been able to share some time that this is a great day to just put some closure on what has been a great year. So thank you all for joining us. We'll be having a town hall meeting after this, but first we're going to hear from David Gutierrez, who's a professor in the Faculty of Education, and I'm sure I'm going to mess this up, but the Universidad de Castilla-La Mancha in Spain. Sorry, David. Never did go to that pronunciation graduation exercise that I was supposed to do on name pronunciation. He has taught physical education at secondary school and university levels since 1998. His PhD study investigated the development of tactical knowledge in school-aged children. His main research focus is on pedagogical models, specifically on teaching games for understanding and the sport education model. His current project hybridizes these pedagogical models with service learning to increase the well-being of students in sensitive periods such as school transitions. At present, David is also studying in physical education in early years and in implementation of a transdisciplinary methodologies that increase movement during the school day. As part of his academic work, David has been invited to universities in the US, Netherlands, Portugal, Canada, and Finland. Former TGfU Special Interest Group Chair, David is currently chair of the International Board of this association, whose mission is to promote and support games-based teaching and learning across the world. David, thank you for joining us, and the screen is all yours, as they would say.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you everyone for attending this conference, and thank you for the organization committee for inviting me. I will share my screen and see if it works. Okay. Okay, do you see my presentation? Perfect. Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone. Good morning, good night, good afternoon. I think there's one of the main uses of being here, and the main uses to be in the title. That's we are moving globally, and with globally, I really mean the full global, the full Earth, because we are right now watching this and trying to move forward in a quality teacher and coaching sport and games. So in this presentation, I want to show the path that has been followed since the search of a better way of teaching games and sports began. I will discuss the tendency and the necessity of moving globally as the collective to overcome labels and definitions. To this end, the presentation is divided into three parts. The first part is I will describe the emergence of specific approaches of games teaching with respect to its primary goals and assumptions, and how this further developed towards the global idea of a game-based approach. The second part consists of analysis of the perspectives of a game-based approach in different countries. And in the third part, prospects of future direction research, pedagogical and dissemination development are considered. So when I was reviewing for this presentation and also for another work about the history of how, from a very old concern about how to improve teaching games and sports began and in what moment we already are, I found that it could be divided into 4 stages. The first was identification of a problem, and this problem was a common and all concern. The identification of deficiencies in the traditional and technique-oriented way of teaching and coaching, games and proposals that address this issue partially and significantly earlier to the publication of TGfU model. Along with my colleague Roberto Sanchez, we are performing an historical review on game-based approach origin. From it, we know that in the first half of the 20th century, there were already several authors who had the concern of grouping sports not only by skills, but by tactical intentions, and therefore, the idea of transfer as an important element began to rise, which surely helped to worry and seek for another way of teaching games and sports, not just focused on technique. This is perfectly reflected in what Hintman wrote in the 50s. We can read, and there's a very old book, but that it said, field hockey and golf could be placed together on the basis of the fact that in each game, players hit the ball with clubs. So, in terms of which skill is used. But the reason for hitting the ball with the clubs is different in the two games, and it's this reason that determines the classification of each game. So they were already talking about reasons which are finally seen at tactical problems. We'll be seen at that. Nevertheless, it's not until the 60s that the first methodological proposals were published. Of special relevance are German, French, and English traditions refer to the existence of general technical-tactical principles to various sporting games, and the use of game forms for teaching team sports. According to Hopper, the TGfU model was presented as the organization of good practices rather than proposing it as an innovation. The TGfU model, as subsequent development in the 80s by Bunker, Thorpe, and Elmont, integrated the partial solutions mentioned in the first stage with contributions from various disciplines and knowledge domains. From there, the main elements of TGfU model, like the learning cycle, pedagogical principles, and game categories, were published during the 80s. This led to the third stage, or a wealth of ideas. Different variation and extension of the TGfU model have been developed from games teaching starting from the 90s to present. In Almont's last work as first author, titled Rethinking Teaching Games for Understanding in 2015, he described this situation as wealth of ideas, as that's the title I choose for this stage. Same time, he expressed concern when he stressed that the number of quarters has begun to divide the community of practitioners and researchers with the game field, and this can harm the emergence of new thinking. In this wealth of ideas, the game began to be seen as the main thing in the middle of different approaches with different goals, and different approaches all over the world began to be published, researched, and disseminated, like tactical game model, game science, play practice, and so many others. This wealth also includes the analysis of TGfU model in the light of different frameworks and theories, as well as progressive and increase in scientific publications, especially in the beginning of the 20th century, which we can see a very linear progression from there. The concern expressed by Almont can be challenged through the analysis and categorization of proposals developed during this stage that match with the goals and concerns proposed initially by TGfU model. Specifically, studying the different approaches, we can see contribution to different issues, like game-based approach for early years. In this related with this issue, some proposals have been able to adapt game-based approaches to early years. These appear not as a complete approaches, but as initial stages. For example, all schools proposed an initial stage called playful situation orientated. Then is Slate, one with the title of Fundamental Movements and Tactics, and similar contribution can be found in Play with Purpose. Tactical game model successfully structured and simplified the TGfU model to facilitate professional development and programming by teachers. Other examples can be found in innovation game competence model and step gain approach. Concerning to expanding the learning game design, how do we design games to be a better way of teaching and learning? Play practice, simplification, and game shaping provide variations of TGfU pedagogical principles of designing by representation and exaggeration. On the other hand, game sense provided indication for design open learning environments. Furthermore, the inclusion of a student within the designing games approach was aimed to promote understanding and democratic behaviors. Some proposals also achieved the promoting key aspects of teaching during the game, such as attention to diversity through principle of focusing and adaptation, or the development of motivations and creativity. Others have expanded the outcome of questioning, including social components or affective issues. In terms of game-based approach for coaching, some proposals solved the question of how to adapt TGfU ideas, initially designed for physical education teachers, to coaches, both for coaches with deep content knowledge, as game sense, and instructors with little experience in games teachings, like in top play sport, games and cards. When we think about the widespread expansion of the approach, some of these approaches have successfully expanded the model in either tailoring and institutionalizing a game-based approach in a specific country, like game concept approach in Singapore, or globally by creating comprehensive, easy-to-follow materials, like the team in Kent State did with tactical game model. Tactical game model and tactical decision learning model developed and popularized the use of instruments to evaluate the most relevant aspect of the game. The main example is game performance assessment instrument, which is of use also allows it to be used as a peer learning and also assessment in research. This instrument was further studied and developed for different authors. Lastly, a more authentic sport experience in PE has been developed in different proposals. Some approaches pursue a more comprehensive sport experience and promote social learning by integrating some fundamental sport elements, as formal competition and affiliation in team ball, or fitting TGfU into a sport education model, like in clinic game day, or different proposals that hybridate these two models. Then we arrive to the fourth stage, which can be called moving to the game-based approach to the collective. The TGfU Special Interest Group can be seen as a main element on this moving. We can see in its mission, which is in the bylaws, that its mission is to establish globally representative group of institutions and individuals committed to the promotion and dissemination of scholarly inquiry around ways of knowing, learning, teaching through game-based approaches. the history of the TGfU Special Interest Group is quite linked to Joy Butler and can be, for those who are interested in that, can be read in the book published in 2021, Teaching Games for Understanding from Conception to a Special Interest Group. Within the TGfU Special Interest Group, there's also a group called International Advisory Board, which right now comprises 27 countries, and with also the mission of dissemination of TGfU SIG policies, also to include in the website what's happening in each country. So it's quite easy to understand what's happening in around the world in these countries. Of course, there's countries that is not here, but we're really increasing the number of countries, and also inform the executive board information progress on each country. EIB projects in the last years have comprised like game-based approach in times of resistant mobility or professional development for low understanding or beginners, teachers and coaches. One of the issues that can be seen as an example of moving globally is that these materials, these really nice resources, have been translated into different languages from members of the IAB, which is really helpful for expanding and moving globally to the core ideas of game-based approach. Finally, in the last 2 years, has been developed a game-based consensus statement within the TGfU Special Interest Group, which also is an element and a proof that we are really moving as a collective to the idea of game-based approach as an umbrella that can include all the ideas, all concerns, and the way we understand to improve games and sport teaching. Also, the 40th anniversary activities that have been developed last year, including the very next publication of Teaching Games for Sport and for Understanding book, will be, in my opinion, very helpful to create the idea that we are again moving globally to this concept of game-based. So in this second part, I would like to present the result that a study that together with Jeroen Koekoek, we carry out to find out the different situations regarding the use of game-based approaches in different countries. So this study we thought was important to know where we are and to find out ways to moving forward. We used multi-analysis method that included the following sources: TGfU IAB What's Happening, published in our in the website of the Special Interest Group, an ad hoc explanatory questionnaire with topics regarding the adoption of game-based approaches for each country, and presentations made by scholars and teachers educators from 11 countries about the particular game-based approach variant they use in the country, displayed during the symposium Game-Based Approaches Globally. This symposium was organized by the network Teaching Games in the Eindhoven, the Netherlands, as part of the events for the 40th anniversary. Three main issues arise from the analysis of the data. Firstly, the international acceptance and expansion on game-based approach. We gather information around 20 countries. Of course, it's not systematic all over the world study, but we thought it's a good image of what's happening in terms of a global movement, this global movement. So countries included in group 1 use traditional games teaching approaches as a main approach, and hardly use game-based approach. Example of countries that provide information and be in this situation are Italy, Iran, Argentina, Brazil. A group 2 of countries that have expanded game-based approach and use a specific and strongly developed approach, like Malaysia, New Zealand, Australia, United States, or Canada. In these countries, there is a strong tradition in using a specific game-based approach in educational settings. Several academics and teacher educators in the country play a prominent role in developing a specific knowledge within the international community. Countries, group 3, comprise countries that use a general approach that often is influenced by multiple perspectives of game-based approaches. These countries, like England, Netherlands, or Spain, specifically use a general approach, still also including technique center. That is, derived from a variety of approaches and elements of a game-based approach. Pedagogical principles are used in practice and integrated the educational curriculum. Mostly, game-based approach is not exclusively adopted on the national level, although specific game-based approaches characteristic are recognizable. For example, the use of small side games, game-based and learner-centered perspectives, or guide discovery. Finally, in group 4, few countries like Singapore, Germany, or Japan have developed a particular and unique approach that largely fits with the national educational goals. The specific and clear existence, the objectives, and corresponding curriculum content are mostly aligned with game-based approach that specifically has been developed. However, it must be taken into account that this work has great limitations because the sources of information are also limited, and it doesn't not prevent to be a complete vision of the country. We are convinced that countries are not homogeneous, so can be in different groups depending on the area, region, or influence of different university. So, in terms of perceived barriers to incorporate game-based approach, we found that several countries experience resistance when implementing a game-based approaches. Specifically, this issue is due to the gap that is perceived between knowledge of game-based approach scholars working at the university and the practice of PE teachers in schools. Barriers we found in the way PE teachers are informed and felt whether they are skilled enough to work with the approach. It's recognized that teachers still face in practice the difficulty of their changing role. That is, from instructor of teaching technique skill to teachers as a facilitator. Besides the limitation of this kind of teaching beliefs about game-based approach, also time issues, lack of space, or large class sizes are informed by teachers. An important notion that also derived from the answers of countries in group 1 is the lack of significant resources that are written in native language. Several non-English speaking countries, therefore, must rely on English written resources, which on the one hand are mainly only accessible to scholars, and on the other can result in translation issues that lead to misconceptions. With respect to future directions and prospects for the development of game-based approach, almost all countries from the 4 groups have stressed that organizing national and international seminars, workshops, and conferences can lead to expanding the global ideas. Also, in countries in which a game-based approach already is well established, like Group 2, there is still a call for data and valuable resources that becomes available for academics and in particular for practitioners. Countries with often a specific implementation of game-based approach, Group 1 and 3, have stated that the first important initiative for developing a game-based approach in practice
I think you went on mute, David.
So, have you listened to me?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Not before?
For like 2 seconds. I don't know what happened. It just went out.
Okay.
We still have your pearls of wisdom otherwise, so keep going.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, Linda. So, future directions for developing a game-based approach is collective. That's the third part. Okay, we can divide it. Ideas of how to develop a game-based approach as collective into research, pedagogical development, and dissemination. These ideas are focused in the main aim of this presentation, which is, as I said, how to move forward as a collective to this idea that can be the umbrella for moving forward together. So it not have to be seen as a complete vision of future trends and perspectives. In research, it can be suggested that to organize national and international scientific collaborations to conduct review studies and inventory studies with respect to the degree of implementation of game-based approach in specific countries. And it has been presented in this presentation before, but in a more systematic way. This means that both academics, educators, and policymakers can learn and benefit from the expertise and study of countries in which a game-based approach have been expanded and incorporated. Such information may contribute to global knowledge and understanding of several stages of developing an approach. Also, research should inform on how game-based approach addresses global issues such as social and justice and equity, and has been also, this concern is also in the game-based approach statement. If you read it carefully, you see we were thinking about how to really inform of our ideas of what is inside of using a game-based approach. In that statement is clearly said that is also for developing thoughtful players, which comprise this idea for social justice and equity. Previous examples trying to address this issue have been published and also will be discussed during this very conference, both in the pre-recorded presentation and in a table of experts. Again, in the very new book that will be published in next months, there's also a section for future direction, including promoting of justice, equity, and diversity. So even if this is a prospect and wishes for the future, is already in the aim of scholars to address this issue. In addition, studies that focus on the integration of a game-based approach with other scientific disciplines and theoretical frameworks should be done to move forward in research. Research is the basis of the following sections, that is dissemination and pedagogical development. In terms of dissemination, countries from the first group that neither knowledge nor game-based approach implementation that want to expand a game-based approach first must start networking at educational level. This means that teacher educators and academics start networks to share knowledge from pre-service and in-service teacher professional development. To achieve this stage, the promotion of a national network or community of game-based approach will be very helpful, together with being part as a member of the international community as TGfU Special Interest Group, for example. The Dutch network Teaching Gains may serve an interesting example of how faculties for teachers and educations be with similar but also particular own ideas on game-based approach, collaborate, benefit from each pedagogical ideas, and share knowledge regarding game-based at a national level. In this stage, when this stage has been reached, then this situation may create the opportunity to slightly change the national curriculum by including a game-based approach as part of a model-based physical education, which is a very strong concept that we should use to expand our approach, or as a part of a pedagogical renovation and quality PE. For example, in the last curriculum of Finland, they include teaching models, and within these models, the teaching games for understanding model. So all the practitioners that read the new curriculum will be seeing these teaching models as a way to move forward in a quality bid. More or less same situation in Spain and Brazil. The new curriculums mention pedagogical models and games categories, which again is a partial solution, but in the right direction to be game-based approach at the normal way and not, again, as an innovative way of teaching games and sports. In terms of materials for youth grassroots sports, that's also very important because we are not only talking about PE, but also for coaching. So developing these materials for the early stages of sport appears to be very important in terms of dissemination. An example is the initiative of Brazil national government in developing 2 books in 2014 for invasion and net and wall sports, both for teaching sports after school hours. For pedagogical development, we can see different ideas to move forward in a game-based approach as a collective. Firstly, in the use of new technology is a challenge to improve learning processes, but while not losing main ingredients, which in my opinion have been a problem when we find these resources as a trend and not very really understand the way they can help us. The use of digital technology should go beyond the goal of increasing motivation, which is the main goal now in using it, but in the shift to improve learning processes and beyond, in the development of type thought processes that we cannot develop without these means. Also, students as game designers, both continuing with established game design approaches in which game appreciation and democratic processes are developed, while new games are being designed, as well as using by themselves those processes to adapt to their own games out of PE or out of school sport. The designing of new games and game categories that allow the creation of new tactical problems with which to expand the tactical repertoire of the apprentices. Normally, we work with the main known 4 categories, but there is so many proposals, very, very interesting, in mixing different categories, inventing new categories. When we are talking about tactical principles, tactical problems, normally we refer to the more well-known tactical problems. But if we move forward to these well-established categories, it's much likely that we found very nice tactical issues and way to understand the sport and way of thinking. On the other hand, an interesting phenomenon is occurring in terms of designing games, new games, and alternative games. I will talk about Spain because I don't really know if this is a global movement. In Spain, perhaps in other countries, the rise of new sports designed by teachers, practitioners, and the introduction of these alternative games as predominant content in the curriculum. In their search for more inclusive sport practices and less technical component, they design modified games with interesting variation and mix of the components from different categories. This search can facilitate the pedagogical renovation towards a game-based approach, that we physical educators should know how to take advantage of this. In Spain, there are so many new sports that use the same, not all, but some of the same elements we use in game-based approach, like modification, decreasing technical difficulty. But they are partially solutions. We have to find the way to join this effort to, to renovate the pedagogical way of teaching. Integration of game-based approaches and other pedagogical models to improve social learning and equity. There are so many examples already with sport education, with teaching personal social responsibility, and in the last years with service learning. We need to know how to integrate this element without making this application too difficult, because sometimes we research, propose, and implement approaches too difficult for practitioners. So there is so many means in the pedagogical models that we can use to improve social learning equity, but at the same time we have to be realistic that it has to be easy to use for practitioners if we want to really be in schools. The use of pedagogical principles to inspire methodological changes in other areas of physical education and sport outside of teaching games. That can be a really nice pedagogical development. I found that people that really understand game-based approaches have a great knowledge, not only about how to teach games, but to educational goals and frameworks in general. For example, in those that include a high decision-making component, such as fighting sport, or those that will be benefit from modification strategies that allows to design developmentally appropriate real-like practice in educational settings, such as outdoor or adventure activities. Furthermore, in line with constraint-led approach, the knowledge about modification that we really develop when we are using a game-based approach can be useful to other PE content, especially in early years. Other good pedagogy knowledge from game-based approach can be used to understand and promote quality teaching beyond physical education. This is very useful when we are talking about faculty of education and teacher training for primary education. Normally, these teachers had to teach in different subjects, and to understand how the constructive perspective have been used for games teaching can enlighten how to use in different subjects. For example, the method of building thinking classrooms in maths is very similar, has very common elements that when we are watching a TGfU or game-based approach lessons. To make this links in a teacher, I think, can be very useful to renovate and a more constructive and current way of teaching. Well, that was my presentation. I hopefully achieved the means of going from the beginning, that's all concerned to the current days. We are celebrating the 40th anniversary in a way that we are really moving globally. That's my feeling. I want to thank you, Roberto Sanchez and Jeroen Cook, because they allow me to use works in progress for this presentation. Also to those who have introduced, motivated, and taught me about teaching games and beyond. And especially to Len Elmond and Joe Butler, with whom I was fortunate to share many meetings at TGfU Special Interest Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Awesome. I appreciated the comprehensive look back and forward to where we're going. I liked the levels of groups that you shared with us. I thought that was very interesting as we look to adoption, because you don't just drop off the face of the earth and you're like, voila, a TGfU teacher, a games-based teacher. And the other links to subject matters, thank you for that. I've been hounding about that for a few years now, that it happens in other classrooms too, and other content areas. And I find the whole new games category, I see new games and I'm like wondering what the new category might be. So we'll see what happens with there. And then my favorite, all-time favorite, was the barrier. And you had the horse going over the barrier of using tactical games. When I couldn't decide if it was the horse going over the barrier or the horse's patootie for people who aren't trying to use this model. So I was like, well, all right, I like the picture. Otherwise, it has metaphoric value in a number of ways. So thank you so much, David. I'm opening it up to questions, if you have any for David as we close out this first session. I have good wait time, so, right, 10 seconds. One. Comments, questions? Felipe, Claudio, is that you? Yeah, hand up.
Yes, hello.
Hello,
Hello,
Claudio.
everyone.
Hello,
Thank
Claudio.
you for being here. So nice to see you all. David, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you. So we are used to your very good work, high standard work. So this was another piece of it. Well, it's more like a common a reflection, because we kind of identify and connect with each other's experience. We all that work in this area, because somehow we live the very similar problems, and our strugglings and what worry us is very much similar. So, but for you as a teacher educator, I'm not saying that you to kind of hierarchize one biggest problem, but what do you feel more difficult to deal with what you are trying to do? Is it with in-service teachers, with trainee teachers, with the system? Could you do a slight reflection on that, on your experience?
Yeah. Hi, Claudio. Thank you very much for that question. Well, there are several, but I would say that one of them is the background of the students. So I face two different backgrounds in my students. I work in the Faculty of Education. Sometimes we found two very different group of backgrounds. One of them is very strong sport background. They have experienced so many hours in a specific approach, normally traditional approach, and we have like just one semester to change their minds. So it's very difficult. So they have the content knowledge, but very difficult to go into the deep aims and ideas. On the other side, and probably that's even more difficult, we find students that have not content knowledge enough. So the pedagogical knowledge we want to transmit just grow up. It's very difficult. And I have to deal with these kind of two groups normally. And I have to admit, I can't, I don't know if I found a good solution, but I try. On the other side, as you know, I work with the sport education model too, same time. And it's much easier to understand the sport education model as a full package. Even if you're after that, you implement in a different way, but you know you're using this model. Sometimes it's difficult to say, okay, you are using or not to use a game-based approach because there are so many different elements. So from which element we should begin, and from there to build the full understanding of the model and progressive implement it in the schools. That's also one of my questions. I don't know if to just to transmit everything, or let's try to make a very, very core element, send them to schools, and then come back and I will teach you the rest. Sometimes I feel that we want to transmit so many elements that they really mess it up and retreat to the common use of just traditional way of teaching. I would say that my two concerns of main difficulties.
Thanks, David. I love it that they really mess it up. That's perfect. Other comments? Thank you, Claudio. Anybody else? Everybody's got their shy voice. Oh, Wendy. All right. Awesome. Then welcome.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. That's great to hear from you and to think about the dilemmas that go on, don't they, for all of us. You know, we're trying to ensure that the students have joy in what they're doing and their success, you know, that they're success orientated, regardless of where they start from. And we know that the learners do the learning. So, you know, in terms of us and our role as teacher educators, then, you know, it's a matter, I guess, of providing those opportunities, you know, ample opportunities in the learning environments that we set up, I think, so that we, you know, if we're able to allow our students to work with small groups of students, in addition to their regular sort of teaching prac, that's at least one way that they can practice and still be successful. You know, they can be learning to teach and they can be learning to implement some of those principles in the way that they think about the way they design the learning. They can think about that in that smaller environment. So I think certainly that's been something that I've found very successful is to be able to, you know, simplify the teacher learning environment so that you can actually work and scaffold the students' pre-service teachers' experiences in using and developing that approach. So, but it's, yeah, it is very complex. And so, you know, thinking of making it simple but meaningful and keeping joy and keeping success orientation in there and knowing that the game is the central driver for what we're doing. And, you know, I think it's coming down to those really core principles.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah,
I know.
thank you. I agree with you. In the last years I moved from when in the field experience on practices in our lesson is to move to a more realistic group of lesson with 20-25 students to just small groups.
Yep.
Just that small groups we are working in the normal classes where we have 4 or 5. They present just in a small group, so they can skip the full managerial system. So we agree. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Deb Shihai. Good morning. You're on mute. You're muting.
Deb.
Microphone,
Right,
Deborah.
you're on mute? Yeah, you're
we
still
can't
on
hear.
mute. The screen indicates that you're on mute. Up in the right-hand corner for me, it's up in the
Gotcha,
right-hand corner.
I think.
Okay,
Can you
sorry.
hear me now?
Yeah,
Thanks so
Yeah.
welcome, Deb. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. It's great to see everyone. David, as always, you inspire me. Wendy, really awesome. It's interesting the comments that you're making, because I'm really connecting with that. I appreciated the initial question to David, and I thought, wow, you really answered that really well. Because I think one of the things for me has been to ask myself, well, how am I teaching about game-based approaches?
Mhm.
And so, you know, when we're talking about how difficult it is for pre-service teachers or in-service teachers to learn how to become facilitators as opposed to, you know, directors, I had to question, how am I teaching? And so much like you all, I've kind of changed how I'm teaching so that I'm modeling more of the facilitation process. And then I'm having students think about how they're feeling as a student in that process, and then to practice that with their teachers. But I think it's really about getting students to rethink and relearn some of those great memories that they had as athletes, but realizing that they can still create those for their students using game-based approaches. Thanks.
Thanks, Deb. Appreciate
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
Diana, David, did you have a comment for Deb, or do you just want to move to?
Well, short comment. Yeah, I agree again. And I use kind of that. So the first lessons I really tried because normally we are just small time for that they recall how they have been. So if they want to, if they try to think if they have to teach games next day, and this is the first day, so they have to what will be like, and they have to understand and think about themselves why they will teach that way. What memories, knowledge really influence that? Is that what you live? Is that what you learned before my lessons? So and I try to reset this process of discussing at the end of the lessons of the course, games teaching course. So did you change your mind about teaching, and why? Is because you have to do the exam, or do you really think about it? So I think it should be a question after the exams and the grading. So that would be perfect. So
Thank
the
you,
main thing
David.
is, what will they decide after they are out of the faculty, not what they think or they express during the faculty.
That's an excellent point. All right, thank you, Diana.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Diana Nyland. I teach at the State University of New York at Cortland, and we're one of the larger physical education programs in the United States. And I have a question about advocacy, advocating to embed this in the curriculum more. Right now, the only course that we have that is specifically designed to teach teaching games for understanding is a 1-credit activity course that I am the course coordinator for and that I teach. And it's paired with sport education model. So I really have about a quarter of a 1-credit-hour activity course. You get the idea. Now,
Yes.
It is layered into the curriculum in other places, but more as just a brief introduction. So I know you might not be able to answer this easily right now, but anybody who's hearing this, I would love if anybody wants to follow up with me individually for some ideas about advocacy, because as a side note, we have 2-credit hours that are going to open up in our curriculum soon. I thought this might be a moment of opportunity, but I'd love any thoughts or ideas on how to better advocate to have our program for our teacher candidates have this expanded upon.
Excellent question. Open it up. David, do you want to respond first? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. Diana, thank you for the question. The last 3-4 years ago, we did a study in Spain about how many credits faculty of education, which is they produce primary teacher education and physical education, they use for teaching game for understanding and sport education model. So half of them didn't devote anything. So there's no way to renovate pedagogically. So that was in our region, it worked very well. Of course, that we were very keen of promoting it during, from the faculty, but also to include in the curriculum. So in the official bylaws. Once you have them, it's much better to convince the other stakeholders to include this kind of renovate pedagogical knowledge. So sometimes it's down top, but it's if you find a way to do top down, it's absolutely perfect. So good
Awesome.
connection to those to do the bylaws and really put up the front scientific knowledge, evidence that say, we know how to teach, let us to do that. So it's not a matter about how is better. No, we already know. Let's put at the front. But yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah. Anybody else want to chime in and give some more information? Claudio.
Great stuff. I'm really excited because it is refreshing to have these moments with people like you. So I'm really enjoying it. So because we are in the same shoes, so it's easy to connect. So if I could do a comment on this one, because I think it's in drawing on a Diana question. So I think one way of having our future teachers to buy in is that one way is that they get somehow in the presence of the impact it has on students, because it is huge. So we can do this in a theoretical way from presenting them literature, but the best impact was if we have some tour them to schools to see the impact, because it has a huge impact on students' lives, on what is meaningful. And I think here, for example, in my faculty, what we think is a key, and because we also have noticed in the final years that the profile of the future teacher that comes is changing. We used to have every teacher candidate, almost 90%, were prior or present, for example, players, athletes. So they had a kind of a living and intrinsic knowledge of and perception of the educational value. So and nowadays that profile is changing. So people who don't have a background in sport, and just they go to physical education teaching as they could go somewhere else. So, and this has presented challenges. And what we are trying to invest in is what we call the professionality. Because more than their background knowledge, if they are very clear what a teacher is supposed, what is the role, and if we set them very clear what is the role that physical education should play in the full education of the human being, so this will make clear crystal that the student-centered approaches, they are the best avenue to promote this. So this professionality, if the future teachers embed this notion of they need to do the best they could do, the more informed practice that they could do, and to continue to invest in long life professional development. So I think this might be a way, or one more way, at least we are trying to go that way. So let's see what happens in a few years.
Great, thank you, Claudio. We're at our 8 o'clock time, and that means it's a break time. Time to get up and move around, because we know this is all great, but it's not good for our bodies. So from Eastern Standard Time standpoint, we are at 8 o'clock, and at 8:15, we will join for the town hall meeting. So go ahead and walk away from your screens and do whatever you need to do. And thank you so much, David. Awesome
you.
job. Thank you. Appreciate it, and I appreciate the discussion. Awesome. See you in a bit.
Thank you. See you all.